doing the online textbook assignments. Alright, so here's something that I make you do in class that you'll theoretically turn in because it's not online. And still, some of it's shoddy. That's a little sad. Okay, we're going to go through political action committees today. I realize a lot of people aren't here, but this is AP class, and don't stop. Alright. We talked about political action committees at the end of the last unit. We're going to go through this again. After we get to the end of it, we'll stop and we'll watch a little sort of news clip specifically about Citizens United, because Citizens United was a significant court case that affected this. Did anybody in here, not a chance, anybody in here do Citizens United for the SCOTUS project? You had Citizens United? Okay. Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, Citizens United is one of the most important cases that we're going to get. It actually made the cut for the redesign course that's going to start in 2018, where they tell you that you need to specifically know like 20 cases. Citizens United is one of them. And in reality, Citizens United is just now old enough that it could end up showing up on the actual AP test. Okay? If I remember correctly, it was 2010, right? Okay? So it was decided in 2010. You realize that the actual AP test that you take is always going to be out of date, yes? You get that concept? I mean, this is politics, and so a lot of what we do is sort of real time, right? Obviously, we're talking about Trump and things like that. Donald Trump will not be on your AP test, I can guarantee that. Okay? Simply because they write these tests 2 or 3 or 4 years out. Alright, but that means that Citizens United is now at that sort of age where it can absolutely show up on the test. And my assumption is because it is so relevant and pertinent in what is occurring today, that in all likelihood it will show up. Alright, and so again, this is campaign finance. It's not always the most fun thing to talk about, but we got to talk about it. So, when we go back and we look, political action committees are interest groups. Treat them as interest groups. Understand that all political action committees are interest groups. Not all interest groups organize themselves as political action committees. Do we understand that? Alright, we've all taken the SAT, yes? Or at least a PSAT. We understand that logical progression, right? All humans are mammals, not all mammals are humans. Right? Same concept. All PACs are interest groups. Not all interest groups are PACs. Alright? So, when we talk about political action committees specifically, these are organizations that are created whose primary purpose it is to essentially assist with or influence the campaign process and the election process. Alright? So, when we really talk about political action committees, for the most part, we'll talk about political action committees and the growth that begins in the 1970s, because it's in the 1970s that we begin to regulate campaign finance in a significant manner. Alright? That's going to cause or lead to instances in which we're going to cap the amount of money that people can spend, or the amount of money that people can donate to campaigns. Alright? This is due almost entirely to this fear or this belief or this ideology we have that allowing too much money into campaigns leads to, sort of the purchasing of political offices. Right? So if somebody is capable of donating $200 million to the Republicans, they might get a cabinet level position. You know what I'm talking about? No. Education secretary. Right? That's the actual criticism Bernie Sanders made of her. Right? But in addition to that, what we're also talking about is companies buying essentially congressmen, or at least buying their votes. Right? So if a corporation or political action committee gives enough money to an individual congressman, that political action committee can assume or can influence the congressman to vote in the manner in which they want them to vote. All right. So this is one of our earliest fears. All right. What you will see is that from the 70s and then moving forward, we have a significant growth in political action committees, specifically in terms of business-related political action committees. So these are corporations or not just individual corporations, but rather like commodities or groups or, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Conglomerates, maybe that's the right word. But there are multiple businesses together that form one industry, and they can create their own political action committee. All right, we have a significant increase in really what are just political action committees, right? Not connected to an individual industry or corporation or something like that. All right. But understand that like interest groups, political action committees can encompass a large, excuse me, a large variety or a large sort of cross-section of American interest. All right. Now, like I said, this all begins to explode in the 1970s. One of the things that we get is we begin to get campaign contribution limits. Okay, so in the 1970s, you were only afforded the opportunity to donate a certain amount of money to a singular individual. Once you have donated that amount of money to that individual campaign, you can no longer contribute. All right? What political action committees allow for is that you can now commit money to a political action committee in addition to the money that you give to the individual campaign. That PAC is then a way for you to essentially increase your donations to the individual campaigns, because the PACs are allowed to give money to the campaigns. The PACs are also allowed to work with the campaigns or advocate on behalf of the campaigns, etc. All right. Now, all of these numbers that you find up here in this PowerPoint are going to be relatively out of date to this point, and in large part because of the Citizens United decision. Okay? Citizens United is the reason why so much of this is out of date. All right? Because through Citizens United, we're going to create an ideology here that money is the equivalent of free speech, and that is going to afford the opportunity to eliminate or significantly restrict any limits to campaign contributions. Okay? So, once we have the expansive growth of political action committees, okay, I want you to realize that by the time we get to the 1990s, okay, which is really like 20 years after this whole idea starts, and specifically in congressional campaigns, those congressmen who raise a significant amount of money through political action committees are almost incapable of being defeated in terms of seeking re-election. And now, PACs and super PACs make up increasingly larger percentages of presidential races in this day and age as well. But for the purposes of the test, for the purposes of class, what you should really understand is that PACs are going to focus on congressional campaigns, because they make up a much larger percentage of a congressional campaign budget. All right? That should hopefully make some sense to you, right? If Donald Trump comes to Texas, will people in Texas give him money? Yes. Right? Okay. If Pete Olson goes to Oklahoma trying to raise money for his re-election, will people give Pete Olson money in Oklahoma? No. Right? Right? So there's a far more opportunity at a presidential level, which is part of what influences or causes the outcome to occur in the manner in which it does. All right. Now you'll notice up there as you look at the bottom of this slide that it shows you the individuals from both the House and the Senate who actually lost their re-election campaigns. despite raising more than $500,000 from political action committees. Again, very small numbers. All right? And this is due in large part to this aspect of what the money is actually going to be utilized for. All right? All right, so when you look, again, and like I said, some of these numbers are out of date, but it's still important to understand these numbers nonetheless. All right? What we have are instances now where congressmen, senators, and representatives are raising money when they're not even fighting for re-election. Now, if you're not fighting for re-election, why do you raise campaign funds? Well, here's the thing. It's not necessarily for no reason. And you're not technically allowed to profit off of your campaign. Okay? But if you are running unopposed and you can, I don't know, you can raise, let's say you're Ted Cruz, right? So let's talk about the Senate. And you can raise $10 million. What can Ted Cruz do with that $10 million? You can use it to travel around the state of Texas, right? He's running unopposed. Even if Ted Cruz does have an opponent officially in 2 years, Ted Cruz is running in what we call, either opposed or he'll have what we call token opposition, right? Very limited opposition that is irrelevant. All right, Ted Cruz, the only way Ted Cruz loses his seat is if he somehow loses in a primary, right? Which I personally don't see happening right now. All right, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't happen down the road. I'm pretty sure that's how Ted Cruz got his seat in the first place. All right. But what Ted Cruz can do, and he raises as much money as he can in order to further all sorts of political goals that he personally has. He can use that money for research. He can use that money to conduct polls. He can use that money to determine how the people of Texas feel about certain issues. He can use that money, like I said, to travel around the state of Texas and meet people. Okay? Now, these are all things that people do while campaigning, and they technically help garner votes, right? Okay? Americans are more likely to vote for the individual that they get to see and meet and talk to, right? That aspect of personality, and then we do vote in a personal nature anymore. Okay? But additionally, Ted Cruz can use all of this, and it's 100% legal. But what it really does is affords him an opportunity to increase his sort of visibility within the state. It can increase his visibility within the country. He could actually use his campaign money, the money he raises for his campaign, to actually go out and help campaign for other people. Okay? All of this could theoretically lead to an instance in which Cruz gains enough popularity and support that he decides that it is time for him to run for president of the United States. Alright? So that's part of the reason why you're garnering or you're trying to raise money even when you do not have a legitimate sort of threat to your seat. And now, we've talked about this before. We talked about this with interest groups and interest groups giving money to candidates and who they're actually giving money to. Okay? One of the things that we learn, right, and political action committees, like I've said before, they are interest groups. They are going to give a significant amount of money to incumbents. All right? This is an incumbent advantage. All right? And incumbents have this advantage because interest groups and political action committees are functioning or are basically organizing themselves around some sort of ideology or some sort of issue. And they will then give money to incumbent candidates who have a proven voting record to support that issue or that sort of ideology or philosophy. And so what we see is that a vast majority of the money from PACs goes to the incumbent. The only time it ever really goes to the challenger is when it's called targeting. Okay? And that is when a political action committee is specifically targeting the individual that is currently in office because they see that person as being a huge threat to whatever their philosophy or issue is. Alright? Then additionally, political action committees will tend to give money to people that they see as granting them access. Alright? Now, this is where it begins to get a little troubling. Alright? Because this is the very definition of what you call pay for play. Alright? Now, you might have heard that term. That is a term that the Republicans used in order to attack Hillary Clinton, because they said that while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she engaged in this practice in which she only gave access to individuals who were making contributions to the Clinton Foundation. Do we remember hearing that attack? And that is a pay-for-play thing or ideology, right? What that means is the same sort of aspect happens with Congress, right? Which is part of the issue that we have there, right? Or part of the struggle that we have. Okay. Additionally, PACs give money to specific congressional leaders, and again, leaders who are a part of specific committees or specific organizations within Congress that might help them, right? So when you look at, and I think McCain still is, I think that John McCain, the senator from Arizona, is currently the Armed Forces Committee chairman for the Senate. Okay, so if you are a political action committee that works for Boeing or Lockheed or some organization that creates military technology, okay, you might be willing to give John McCain significant funds to see John McCain get reelected, because that is actually beneficial to you as an organization, right? And this goes back to that granting access, because what do they want access from McCain for? They want information. And this is not a bribe, and this is why this becomes legal. And Lockheed or Boeing, they are not giving John McCain money for his reelection and then expecting John McCain to vote in favor of their airplane design for the latest military contract. Instead, they're giving John McCain money, and in return they get a little access to him. They get to talk to him. They ask McCain questions. The questions that they're asking McCain are, what types of technologies do you want to see on your next fighters? And that way, Lockheed or Boeing, they're not going into this blind. They have some sort of idea of what the United States government wants, and then they use that in order to create a plan or a plane that will garner them a contract. All right? So that's how it couples into access and then special influence or committee chairs. And the tighter the race, the more likely political action committees are to give money, especially, again, if that incumbent is somebody that favors their ideologies. Okay? This is a test question that you will see all the time, right? The little 7 right there. Political action committees make up a higher percentage of congressional campaign funds than presidential campaign funds. Okay? Pay particular attention to the term percentage. Right? Again, there's 535 congressmen, right? 472 of them are up for re-election every 2 years. Right? The president is up for re-election every 4 years. There is significant amount of money that goes into presidential campaigns in terms of PACs. But from a percentage basis, Congress makes up the higher, because congressmen do not have the same fundraising opportunities as a president does. All right? Political action committees will engage in education projects as well. All right? So aside from actually dealing with the individual congressman, political action committees can try to raise public interest about specific issues. All right? Political action committees can also function as sort of super PACs from time to time, in which case they utilize soft money, money that is not limited, does not have to be given to the campaign, and can be utilized in terms of independent expenditures,
meaning it's what they spend for their own travel and their own sort of infrastructure, or single issue advocacy ads, things like that, all right? So that is a way for them to get around all of those sort of concepts. Now, who has PACs? Right, so again, we talked about the varying types of interest groups, yes? Remember that from a couple days ago? We have varying types of political action committees as well, all right? So the significant percentage of this, they are corporations. Corporations have political action committees. And again, like I've told you in the past, just with interest groups, it might not be an individual single business, but rather some sort of industry, right? Like milk producers, like coal, things like that. Okay, so that's one for corporations, all right? The second, and this is really quickly growing, okay? In fact, when political action committees initially sort of took off, this was the one that sort of skyrocketed faster than everything else. And these are ideological organizations, or organizations that are not connected to an industry or a business or something of that nature. And so these would be solely what you would think of as sort of political action committees. Right? Their sole purpose is to advocate for ideological or political issues. All right. Professional health trade associations, this would be things like AMA, the American Medical Association, or teachers unions that have a political action committee, things like that. And well, I guess the teachers union would probably fall under the actual unions. Okay. Sometimes nurses will fall under this. Sometimes they'll fall under. Sometimes nurses are unionized as well. All right. With all of this, understand like a lot of our political issues in the United States, we have an overrepresentation of the wealthy. Okay. So what this does is now we have to look at some of the problems or some of the issues behind political action committees. So why are political action committees considered dangerous or problematic to our sort of political system? Okay? And again, if you go back and you look at all of the issues surrounding the Citizens United case, right, you find significant sort of argumentation on either side about some of the ills or the problems with allowing unlimited spending and funding and money into to campaigns. All right. So the first thing is we have this ethical conundrum. All right. Does providing money to candidates buy you something? Lauren, what do you think? No idea? Late night last night? So this is the first question that we have to sort of wrestle with. All right? Are you buying something in donating money to a campaign? Okay? Now, the easy answer to that question is yes. Okay? Think about it. At some point in time in your life, you will probably give some sort of funding, some sort of money to some campaign. Are you buying something then? You really are. Okay? Now you're not buying access, you're not buying a vote, you're not even buying the individual, right? But what you might be purchasing is an ideology. What you might be purchasing is somebody who thinks or feels similarly to you. Okay? Now, and what was the number? Bernie Sanders used to run around and talk about his like 3 million individual contributions of $27 or whatever the average was. Right? So if we're talking about $27, what are you really buying? Not a whole lot, right? Maybe you are buying some ideology. Okay? When we talk about PACs though and the significant amount of money that they can raise, then what's the issue? Are you actually purchasing something there? Okay? So this goes right into the second question, because political action committees have access or influence that the average person doesn't have. Now, obviously, again, this goes into this difference of $27 as a campaign contribution versus 500,000, right? Or whatever it is that the political action committee is garnering. All right. Next, political action committees and interest groups in general, they drive up the cost of campaigning. Okay. In fact, most people will think that that because of political action committees, okay, generally only wealthy people are even capable of running for office anymore. Is that an accurate statement? Anson, how much money does Donald Trump have?
$3 billion.
Sure, I'll go with $3 billion. All right, I think that's probably accurate. And so, fair to say that he's pretty wealthy?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a wealthy guy running for president. Okay, what about Hillary Clinton, his challenger in his past election? How much money does the Clinton family have? Well, not as much. Yeah, that's probably accurate. The only people that have more are like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. Anybody know what the Clintons are worth? So Hillary loves to talk about how she got out of the White House dead broke. Her and Bill didn't have any money. Oh, the poor Clintons. Their net worth today is over $300 million. Okay? Clearly, not poor people. Alright? So let's go back to 2012. Who ran in 2012? Mitt Romney and Obama. Okay, how much money does Romney have? Mitt Romney is filthy stinking rich too. Mitt Romney's worth like $500 million. Right? What about Obama? Oh God, no. No, here's the thing. Look, Obama, by the time he dies, he'll probably be a billionaire. Okay? But, I mean, look at the Clintons. The Clintons got out of the White House with very little money. They now have $300 million. Right? Obama is more than young enough that between speaking fees and book deals and stuff like that, like Obama will be filthy rich by the time he dies, because he's probably got a good 30 years of doing stuff like that, right? Plus, for 30 years, he gets a salary from the national government because, right, presidents do that, right? In fact, I want to say they get like 50% of their salary, which is $200,000 a year. They get $200,000 a year for the rest of his life for doing nothing. Plus, he gets to keep Secret Service agents for the rest of his life, right? Pretty sweet deal, okay? But no, when he ran, he had like $10 million, right? Now, obviously, $10 million with everything that we're talking about, that doesn't sound like that much money, does it? Right? We're talking about a guy with $3 billion, right? Another guy with $500 million, a girl with $300 million. Oh, $10 million. Poor Obama, he poor, right? Okay? Most of our politicians are filthy rich. In which case, if you're talking about all of this and political action committees driving up prices and making it more difficult for the average American to participate, yeah, that's probably an accurate statement, right? And so once you get outside of what I call, or what I consider like America's ruling class or political class, okay? The only individuals that are capable of running for office, people like Donald Trump, who is not part of the political class, tend to be filthy rich. Okay? There are congressmen, and I can't think of any of their names off the top of my head, who went into Congress after selling off private businesses. One of them's a .com like multi-millionaire who's worth like $350 million. Right? And so these are aspects of some of these dangers that we have here, okay? And all of this furthers this incumbency advantage, right? Because the incumbent is able to raise all this money from PACs. The only people that can compete because the cost of campaigning is so high, are individuals who are already wealthy in their own right. Now, why do we defend political action committees? Okay, one, we do see them as a means of participation that the average person doesn't have. Okay, that's a true statement. A lot of people will actually argue the exact opposite of what I just said, in which they would argue that without political action committees, only rich people could run for office. Really, only rich people are running for office already. And then once you get elected into office, and once you are wealthy, then you have the added advantage of garnering that money from the political action committee, and you're capable of doing things like getting reelected. And most important to all of this is the First Amendment. The First Amendment is the right to petition. This is where it really gets sort of tricky. Okay? And then you couple that with, Trace, what was the constitutional issue for Citizens United? Do you remember? Freedom of speech. Right? So between freedom of petition and freedom of speech, right, these get kind of dicey. Okay? One of the good things about political action committees is a lot of them are nonpartisan. Not all of them. Some of them are definitively partisan. But some of the corporate ones, they're just looking out for their corporate interests, right? Or the interest of their members, their labor union, whatever. So it makes them sort of nonpartisan. Okay? Next, we have no evidence, and this is a really good thing, and at least makes political action committees somewhat tolerable. We have no evidence of political action committees actually influencing or changing the vote of an individual senator or representative. Okay, when we go back to everything that I told you that the political action committees are giving money to individual candidates, right? But they are giving money to candidates that have a proven track record of voting along the lines of which they want them to vote. Which means with or without the money from the political action committee, that individual senator or congressman is probably going to still vote in the manner in which they vote, regardless of who's giving them money. Does that make sense? All right, so on the bright side, we don't believe that it does actually buy a vote. Okay? Political action committees, just like interest groups, can provide education as well, though. All right, so they can provide sort of educational knowledge to help sort of educate and inform Congress before it makes its decisions. All right, so we're going to stop there. We've got a fair amount of time.